a classic storm scenario.
I take it you're not showing me this in order to demonstrate the awesome power of nature, Brian.
They kill Les Darcy and they poison Farlex, so you be careful.
And here's the single that wins the match. He's out!
Now that's one marvellous way to make compost, and it works beautifully.
This is truly, truly heavenly.
So, come on.
We might well wonder whether ancient Greek civilization still has anything to say to us. Travel around Athens today, and you see that the modern city looms much larger than the traces of its past. And yet, just as we get the odd glimpse of old buildings, so too it's sometimes possible to catch a hint of the ideas the ancient Greeks have given us. Almost 2,500 years ago, a philosopher was born here. His name was Socrates, and he's come to symbolize one of philosophy's most inspiring gifts to the rest of us. The idea that thinking logically about our lives might help us to be more certain of ourselves, more independent, less conformist, less hamstrung by what other people think. It's the dream that philosophy might set us free. I'd come to Athens to see how a man who famously died for his beliefs might give us the confidence to stand up for our own. Socrates wrote nothing down, and we know what he said chiefly through a series of dialogues he features in, written by his pupil Plato. We're not even sure that this strange little statue is of him. We know he was born in 469 BC and was married to a famously shrewish woman called Xanthippe. When asked why he'd married her, he replied that a horse trainer had to practice on the most spirited animals.
There is one fact about him that stands out. Among all ancient philosophers, he is perhaps the greatest. And there is no clearer evidence of this fact than that he's the only philosopher readily available as a magnet.
The magnet suggests another fact about Socrates, that he was extraordinarily ugly.
In history of a subject with many notably ugly practitioners, he was surely the ugliest. Even his very good friends compared him to a stingray, a satyr, and a grotesque. He compounded his looks by almost never washing, rarely changing his cloak, and never wearing any sandals. It was said that he'd been born in order to spite shoemakers.
Socrates' idiosyncratic habits point the way to one of his most inspiring ideas, that we should find ways to build confidence in our own beliefs and not be too swayed by the opinions of others. There are great similarities between humans and sheep. We may not have wool on our backs or emit baaing sounds, but we often have an urge to follow our fellow creatures passively and have a horror of breaking away from the group. Why do we follow sheepishly behind other people, particularly important other people? Largely because we imagine they must know what they're talking about, and so we trot along behind them. Until 1998, Andrew Miller was a loyal employee at this company, British Biotech in Oxford, where he was director of clinical research. But he began to think that his employers were being over-optimistic about the drugs they were developing, and that the shareholders weren't getting an accurate picture. He was forced to confront an agonizing question. Could it really be possible that he was right, even though all 11 members of the biotech board were against him?
What does it feel like to be one man thinking that something that you're saying is right and 11 other people saying, no, you're wrong? What does that feel like?
Well, it's a frustrating situation. It's, you know...
Is it terrifying as well?
I wouldn't say terrifying, but it is preoccupying, and it does stop you sleeping. And you do, you know, your mind does start to play tricks on you that you know, do make you doubt your sanity to a certain extent, because, you know, one's previous experience in a democracy is overall, you know, the majority tends to have a certain amount of right on its side. And to be honest, in a lot of ways, I was at my wit's end. I used to sit in my office clutching my temples, thinking, have I got this wrong? You know, am I misinterpreting these things? I mean, the science and the technology can be thought of as complicated and confusing. But for me, it's my everyday work, and I understand it well. And you start doubting your own sanity. You think, why is it? Why do I think this, and these 11 guys who are on the board think differently?
Tell me a bit about the pressure to conform in a company like British Biotech.
Well, I think in all companies there are pressures to conform. There are cultures in all companies. You know, these are people who you like and who you're working with. And actually what you want to do is to, you know, appease them. They're your bosses. You are wanting to appease them. You are wanting to help them. You are wanting to work with them. You want to be friends with them.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
The first reason why it's hard to feel confident in Andrew's situation is that we tend to accept that people in authority must be right.
The European community has said this beef is utterly safe.
It's this assumption that Socrates wanted us to challenge, by urging us to think logically about the nonsense they often come out with, rather than being struck dumb by their aura of importance and air of suave certainty.
Start a fight to cut out the cancer of bent and twisted journalism in our country, with the simple sword of truth and the trusty shield of traditional British fair play, so be it.
In deciding when to follow prominent people and when to disagree with them, Socrates had one huge advantage over us. He could always talk to them in person. Athens in his day had a population of just 150,000, and all the citizens came here to the Agora, the main market and meeting place of Athens. If you'd have visited in the 5th century BC, you'd have been likely to see, amongst the bustle of the city, a rather curious, ugly figure. Because for most of his adult life, Socrates got up at dawn and came to spend the day amongst the shopkeepers and merchants who had their stalls here.
It wasn't just local people who came to this spot. It was also the most important people in Athenian society, so that you could meet here at any point in the day, probably, as it were, the opinion formers, the great military generals, the great statesmen, the important rhetoricians, the aristocrats. They could all be found here. And what Socrates did, rather than just idly chatting to people, he would go up to these very important people and ask them great questions on life. He'd basically ask them to explain why they were living the kind of life they were leading. And what happened is that he found there were surprising inadequacies in their understanding of the way of life they were leading, so that wealthy people couldn't really explain why they had money and others didn't. Military generals couldn't explain why they fought battles in a certain way. And I think we take away from this a fascinating lesson, which is that if you have the luck, or at least the courage, to go up to important people and question the way that they're leading their lives, you might be able to find surprising inadequacies of which their very confident demeanor gave absolutely no indication.
The second reason we may hesitate to challenge other people is that we all know in our calmer moments how easy it is to make trouble for the wrong reasons, because we're feeling pig-headed or bloody-minded. Socrates was a nonconformist, and he made trouble for Athenians. But he wasn't motivated by an arrogant wish that everyone should do things his way, nor by the kind of willful eccentricity we might think of when we hear that he went around barefoot and never washed his cloak. What makes his nonconformity valuable is that it was motivated by the desire to find the truth and challenge lazy assumptions, rather than the wish to make trouble.
I think this is roughly what Socrates would do. He'd walk down the main streets in the marketplace of Athens and go up to people and ask them large questions about the meaning of life, which is, in a way, a very fascinating thing to do and also a very irritating thing to do. If you ask people to explain their beliefs, they'll tend to react with aggression a lot of the time. We'll see what happens here. Excuse me, can you tell me, what do you think justice is?
That's a little hard to say.
It is. It's a big question.
I guess just making sure that everyone gets what is like right and fair for them.
Excuse me, can I just ask you a question? What do you think justice is? Parlez français?
Oui.
La justice. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez que la justice?
Going up to people and asking them to explain their beliefs is pretty scary if you're at all shy, like me. People look at you strangely. They imagine that if you ask them to explain why they're living in a certain way, that you know the answer, and are in some way claiming a position of superiority over them.
Non. Les philosophes grecs, ça vous intéresse?
Je connais pas trop la région, donc je suis en vacances, donc voilà.
Merci, au revoir.
Au revoir.
The French, who are supposedly the most philosophical nation, seem to be scoring very low on our Socratic test here, but we'll see what happens next.
Socrates had no such inhibitions. He preferred to be thought a bit over-intense and weird than allow his fellow citizens to continue to muddle along unthinkingly. He wanted all of us to scrutinize what we believed, even on our way to the shops.
Excuse me, sir. Can I just ask you, what do you think the good life is?
No, it doesn't.
As you can probably imagine, Socrates annoyed a lot of Athenians in this way. But at the heart of his approach is an extremely egalitarian idea that everyone has the duty to reflect on their life, and that we are all surprisingly capable of doing so.
You have to be in order to be happy.
You need to have fun. You need to have people that love and care about you, and people to love and care.
We're not often expected to explain why we live the way we do. Socrates asks us to overcome our laziness and timidity, to work out what we really think and stand by it once we have.
What do you think self-control is?
You're talking to the right person.
Self-control, being able to say what you mean at exactly the right time and get your message across.
Philosophy, in his hands, is an invitation open to us all to intelligent nonconformity.
We just think we're philosophers.
Why? What makes you philosopher?
Socrates doesn't just give us the confidence to challenge prevailing ideologies, beliefs and traditions. He also offers us a way to develop beliefs of our own, which can help us to strike out from the crowd. And the way to do so is to put them through a rigorous test which he devised. If our opinions can survive Socrates' test, then they will truly be worth standing up for.
The reason why there are a lot of woolly or at least imprecise ideas out there in the world is that many people imagine that you can come up with a good idea without thinking too hard about it. Socrates thought this was crazy, and to bring out the insanity of this position, compared thinking to potting. And no one would imagine that you could make a good pot without at least following some pretty rigorous steps. And yet many people imagine that you could come up with a good ethical idea, an idea on how to live your life, without thinking too hard about it. Socrates went further in his analogy. He actually came up with a distinct method, a Socratic method of thought. He identified 5 distinct steps which anyone who wanted to come up with a good thought would have to follow in order to do so. And these thoughts can roughly be summarized as follows. Firstly, look around you for statements that many people would describe as plain common sense. For example, that the best jobs are those which are most highly paid, or that happiness comes from being married. Secondly, try and find an exception to this. Could you ever be married and yet unhappy? Or could you ever be in a very well-paid job and yet miserable? Thirdly, if an exception to this statement is found, it must mean that your statement is false or at least imprecise. And in this case, we find that there is an imprecision.
Fourthly, try to nuance the initial statement to take the exception into account. So in our example, realise that it is possible to be quite unhappy in a very highly paid job if it's completely creatively unfulfilling, or to be quite miserable in a marriage if you've married the wrong person. Lastly, you continue this process for as long as possible. You keep trying to find exceptions to your common sense statement. And Socrates said that the truth, insofar as anyone's ever able to reach the truth, lies in a statement which it seems impossible to disprove. If we test our opinions in this way, Socrates believed, we'll be able to construct trustworthy and watertight thoughts, in just the same way as a skilled potter makes trustworthy and watertight pots. The point of Socrates' method is that it makes you far less passive, less inclined to follow the other sheep. If other people disagree, we don't just have to say, limply or petulantly, well, I think I'm right, but I can't tell you why. We'll be able to demonstrate logically why we believe things, and if others ignore the logic, then their opposition won't have to unnerve us so badly.
Most of us imagine that we can't be philosophers because we haven't studied philosophy, we haven't read enough, we haven't gone to school long enough, we haven't done a university degree. And I think what I find extremely inspiring in Socrates is the idea that everyone can think. And not just everyone can think, but everyone has a responsibility to think. As he famously put it, the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates made the idea of an examined life seem far from forbidding.
Socrates suggests that we can have an interesting philosophical conversation anywhere, even on a street corner. Philosophy needn't just happen behind the walls of a university or in a schoolroom. Socrates used to talk to an extraordinary range of people and liked to demonstrate to them that they were all able to arrive at well-thought-out opinions. It's an inspiring idea. However, in our modern democratic societies, where focus groups and opinion pollsters rule, Socrates would have thought that our problem is that we tend to listen to opinions whether they're well thought out or not.
There's too much risk involved with that.
Although Socrates believed that we were all, in theory, capable of living an examined life, he knew that in practice most of us don't. And this meant that he couldn't accept that every opinion was equally worth listening to, any more than that every pot was equally capable of holding water. Strange as it may sound to modern ears, and even though he lived in the very cradle of democracy, Socrates had the gravest reservations about democracy, because he refused to accept that just because the majority supported an opinion, that made it right. And he'd have thought it ridiculous that people in positions of power might be guided by focus groups like this.
Most important decisions in ancient Athens were taken according to the will of the majority. Once a month, the whole citizen body would be asked to gather at the foot of the Acropolis and talk about all the important issues facing Athens. And we find exactly the same approach going on today in modern government and business. Polling organisations, rather like this one, gather groups of people and ask them what they think, and then important decisions are taken according to the will of the majority. I think Socrates would have disagreed violently with what's going on in there. He would have objected not just to the decor, I think, but also to the whole approach, which is that the will of the majority should decide an issue. In his eyes, what matters is whether an argument is logical, is reasonable. That's the way that we should make decisions, not according to the will of the majority.
Believing that the majority can be wrong and being sure when you are right still doesn't make it easy to hold a minority opinion, particularly when your livelihood's at stake. So what gave Andrew Miller the confidence to stand up against his employers, even though it was to lead him into a bitter battle in the media and the law courts?
Yeah, I mean, you can only see the world with your own eyes. You can try to understand what other people are thinking, and sometimes you can. You know, there are definitely times when someone has some strong views that are quite different from yours, that you respect. You see the basis for them. But that's different from being wrong. You know, I think we can accommodate a lot of differing views, but from my point of view, if I do see things that are wrong, I do find it very frustrating.
Socrates died for his beliefs. How far were you prepared to go for yours?
Well, I think there's a big difference between being an individual and having a family. And once I was put into the media war and into the litigation, I was aware that, you know, I was at war, but I had my children at my feet and my wife at my shoulder. And I really had no choice, and I started to realise that the only way out was forwards. And so, you know, we had to sort of fight our way out together. Litigation, it could have destroyed me. It was never going to kill me, but it could have destroyed me. And it wasn't a question of being prepared to go that far. That's just how far it finished up going. But, you know, fundamentally, with regard to sort of my own self-worth, I did think, when I looked in the mirror in the morning when I shaved, you know, at least I think I've acted according to my conscience. I'm in a murky situation.
Andrew feels that he's been vindicated by the out-of-court settlement he received from his employers. Socrates was not so fortunate. The one fact that people tend to remember about Socrates is that he faced a trial and that he was condemned to death. This has remained a very potent image, so that if you walk around the streets of Athens today, you can still see the scene represented all over the place. And that's because it has become an immensely powerful symbol of someone standing up courageously and intelligently against the will of the majority. The charge against Socrates was of having corrupted the youth of Athens and failing to respect the gods the city worshipped. The potential penalty was death.
One March morning, Socrates was asked to show up at the courthouse in Athens, and Socrates was facing probably a jury of 500 Athenian citizens. And what we do know is that the atmosphere inside the courtroom was relatively hostile towards Socrates from the very beginning. They were suspicious of this man. Many of them had been questioned by him before, and they were not on his side. So Socrates was really facing the possibility that he would die, and yet he didn't lose his nerve. And Socrates said, if I was allowed more time to make my case to you, dear Athenians, I'm sure I could convince you of the justice of my cause, but I can't. And he accepted this very fatalistically. When the final vote came to be taken, the majority of the jury decided that he was guilty and that he should be sent to death.
Socrates was led off from the courtroom to the prison just a few yards away. His wife, Xanthippe, came to visit him, but she broke down so hysterically that she had to be led away. Many of his friends were also in tears. Even the prison warder, who had seen many go to their deaths, offered his apologies and said that of all the people who had ever come through the jail, Socrates was the noblest, the most generous, and the wisest. And a few moments later, the executioner came through the door with a cup of hemlock. Socrates was given the cup and asked to drink.
And after a few moments, his legs began to feel heavy. Slowly, the paralysis caused by the conine, the paralyzing agent in hemlock, started working through his body. And within a few minutes, his whole body was paralyzed. And his friend Fido reached forward and shut his eyes.
In Athens today, there's very little of the glory that was ancient Greece and that has inspired the world ever since. And yet, the ideas of Socrates live on. He was once asked where he came from, and he replied, not from Athens, but from the world. And he remains in many ways the global philosopher, born in Athens, but speaking his message to the whole of humanity. Of course, very few of us will be called upon to die for our beliefs. But Socrates makes us see that we all have the capacity, and indeed the duty, to stop following opinions passively, and instead to develop beliefs we can truly have confidence in. Though we're often reluctant to see it, all of us can make the transition from being a sheep to being a thinking person, that is, a philosopher. Ever since ancient times, human beings have looked to philosophy for the secret of happiness. But few philosophers have come up with more suggestive or more relevant answers than one born on the Greek island of Samos, off the coast of modern Turkey, 341 years before the birth of Christ. His name was Epicurus. Very little about him has survived. All of his books have been lost across the centuries, leaving his philosophy of happiness to be reconstructed from just a few fragments. Epicurus believed that we could all find a way to be happy. The problem was, quite simply, that we were looking in the wrong place. Unlike many philosophers, Epicurus's idea of happiness actually sounds rather fun. He didn't think we should feel guilty about wanting to have a pleasurable, enjoyable life, and promised that he could show us how to. Of course, you might wonder why you need a philosopher at all to teach you how to have a good time.
We seem to think that the key to happiness is really pretty easy. It's all about having a lot of money. So we can come to places like this and go shopping.
But before we reach for our wallets, Epicurus wanted us to stop and think. It's easy to imagine that money can solve everything, but can it? Epicurus was committed to a life of happiness. He liked sex, laughter, and beauty, but crucially spent his time pointing out that happiness is in fact rather a tricky issue. And a philosopher might help you to find it more easily than a credit card ever could. That Epicurus was in favour of pleasure at all shocked many of his ancient Greek contemporaries. His philosophy became synonymous with a lotus-eating lifestyle. To this day, people who love luxurious eating and drinking can sometimes be described as Epicurean. In fact, that's a complete misunderstanding.
Epicurus said that pleasure was the most important thing in life, and yet if we actually look at the way that he lived, it seemed he led far from a luxurious life. His house was very simple, his clothes were extremely basic, he always drank water rather than wine, he found fish much too expensive, and he was happy just eating meals with bread, vegetables, and a few olives. He once asked a friend, "Send me a pot of cheese so that I can have a feast whenever I like." These were the kinds of tastes of a man who described pleasure as the end of life.
At the heart of Epicurus's philosophy is a simple thought, that we aren't very good at knowing what will make us happy. Though we may feel powerfully drawn towards material things and be convinced that they are what we require to be happy, we're often wrong. What we want is not always what we need, and nothing shows that up more starkly than our impulse to go shopping.
I like shopping. Most weeks it's just a couple of bags up to, I don't know, sometimes like 10, 12 bags coming out. I like designer names. Dolce & Gabbana stuff, Louise clothes, DKNY, and I love Gucci clothes as well.
Stephen Perry is a hairdresser from Liverpool who spends all his spare time shopping.
I suppose like I could resist, but usually I don't. Usually it's just like go in and shop anyway. Although when I go out buying all this stuff, it makes me happy. At the end of the month, when the credit card and the store card bills and the loan repayments come out and stuff like that, then that doesn't make me happy because I see how much is going out every month on debt.
Nothing too dressy. Sports watch do, tag out.
Yeah, the one with the square face behind.
How many watches have you got?
This one?
Not really that many, it's probably about 10, something like that.
You've only got 10 watches?
Only 10.
I've only got one. What's the one you're wearing now?
Wearing a spoon watch at the minute. Because I like this just for general everyday. Because it's only like £99, so it's...
Stephen often gets into debt, and I couldn't help wondering if his desire to go shopping might be a bit out of control.
Everyday watch. What's the fancy watch?
The £1,000 tag watch.
Oh God, that's amazing. So what's the craziest thing you've bought in terms of like bad impulse buying?
Pair of shorts.
From where?
It's from a shopping mall in Liverpool. These are them actually. They didn't have my size, so I thought, right, these will fit me. But you put them on and they just tend to look like truly horrendous. Like cycling shorts sort of thing.
How much did they cost?
God, I think they were about £50, 50, 60 quid, something like that. They were never taken back. The same as these jeans. I mean, these have still got the labels on because you just got these home and they were like, they were miles too long, miles too big. I did mean to take them back, but I don't like taking things back. Yeah, fine, thanks.
Would you ever get home and you think you're surrounded by shopping bags and you're thinking, God, it's all a bit, what am I going to do with all this?
Yeah, I mean, especially like you come home and you've just got bags everywhere and you just, why have I spent all that? And then the credit card bill comes in at the end of the month and you think, oh, why did I spend all that sort of thing?
In a way, we're all a bit like Stephen, people who shop too much. Epicurus thought he knew why. We don't understand what we really need, and so fall prey to manic substitute desires for huge numbers of ill-fitting trousers or countless pairs of shoes. But Epicurus declared that he had actually discovered what we did need, and luckily for anyone without much money, the ingredients of happiness come pretty cheap. And the first ingredient we need is friends.
Epicurus took the idea of friendship very seriously, so seriously that he made an extremely radical innovation. When he came to Athens at 306 BC, at the age of 35, he bought a large house just outside the city of Athens, in this place here, which we called the Garden. Of course, at that time, it was rather beautiful, a bit more beautiful than it is now, where it seems to be a taxi graveyard. What he did was that he bought this house and asked a group of friends to move in with him. The house was quite large, so there was room enough for everyone to have their own quarters at the same time as coming together for meals and conversations in the common rooms of the house. What Epicurus was doing was picking up on a rather common sense point, which is that friends are a major source of happiness. But I think where he was distinctive was in his idea that in order to really benefit from friends, you had to see them not just occasionally, not just for the odd drink in a bar or the odd chat on the phone, but you had to live with these friends at all times, so they'd be your permanent companions. And I think that was his distinctive idea of happiness.
You wouldn't catch Epicurus devouring lunch on his own in a burger bar. He recommended that we try never even to eat a snack alone. Before you eat or drink anything, he said, consider carefully who you eat or drink with, rather than what you eat or drink. For feeding without a friend is the life of a lion or a wolf. The second thing Epicurus thought we needed to be happy was freedom. And in order to achieve it, he and his friends decided to leave Athens altogether. For them, to be free meant to be financially independent, economically self-sufficient, not answerable to horrible bosses for their income. So they resolved to leave city life and its competitive and gossipy atmosphere behind them once and for all.
So they left Athens and started what could best have been described as a commune. We must free ourselves from the prison of everyday life and politics, Epicurus wrote. And that's precisely what they did. The life was simple, but at least they enjoyed their freedom.
They didn't mind if they looked shabby or didn't have as much money as other people, because they were self-sufficient and had gained their independence from what other people thought. There was, in the financial sense, nothing to prove. Epicurus believed there was a third ingredient necessary for happiness, and that was an analysed life, by which he meant a life in which we take time off to reflect on our worries, to analyse what is troubling us. Our anxieties quickly diminish if we give ourselves time to think them through. And to do that, we need to take a step back from the noisy distractions of the commercial world and to find time and space for quiet thinking about our lives.
Of course, having loads of money has never made anyone unhappy, but I think the lovely idea in Epicurus is that if you're denied money for whatever reason, and yet you have his three goods, that is, you've got friends, you've got an analysed life, and you're self-sufficient, then you'll never be denied happiness. And conversely, if you've got loads of money, but you're lacking friends, you haven't got a self-sufficient life, you're not doing a lot of analysing, then you'll never be happy, according to Epicurus. So if we try and draw this relationship between happiness and money on a graph, imagine that on this side of the graph, you've got levels of happiness, happy you are, and then on this side, you've got levels of income. Now for Epicurus, so long as you've got enough money to provide you with the essentials of life, you can start to be happy fairly early on if you have his three goods. And you won't get any happier the more money you accumulate. Level of happiness stays pretty steady. However, if you've got loads of money and yet you haven't got any friends, you're not self-sufficient, you've got loads of anxieties, then your level of happiness is going to stay very flat. And I think that's a lovely and consoling idea for anyone who's either worried about the fact they may lose their money or is denied the chance to make any.
But if the ingredients of happiness are so simple, why aren't more of us actually happy? Epicurus blamed advertising. As we've just seen, advertising can be enormously seductive. It tends to make us feel that there are all sorts of things missing from our lives. But Epicurus insisted that we only need three things to be happy: friends, freedom, and an analysed life. If he's right, why then do we want to shop so much? Epicurus's answer would be that the commercial world slyly associates the things it wants to sell us with the things it knows that we need. So for example, this might persuade us to buy Bacardi, but only by blurring the fact that it's really the friends we're looking for. This one tries to sell us perfume by naming it after the thing we're all really after: freedom. And this one flogs us whiskey by promising the calm resolution of our problems that only an analysed life could bring us. And it's this blurring of our desires that makes us so confused about what it is we want.
What are the most important things that make you happy?
The people around me. If they're happy, then I'm happy. And like if work's going good, then that makes me happy as well.
But do you ever think, what if I threw all this away, threw all that away, all these jumpers, and just concentrated on getting the work right, getting the family and friends right, I would never have to go to the Trafford Centre again?
Yeah, because if I shop to cheer myself up,
yeah.
If I'm already happy, then I don't need to cheer myself up to myself. At the minute, I'm fairly happy, so admittedly I'm not shopping quite as much as what I used to, but who's to say that next week something might happen and then I'll just have to go and shop.
Epicurus may have lived more than 2,000 years ago, but he would have understood the pressures that make people like Stephen shop so much. And he had a bold and practical solution to counter them. The place to find it is here, in a dusty and remote corner of southwestern Turkey. That Epicurus should still speak to us at all is something of a miracle, as every one of the 300 books he wrote has been lost. But his philosophy developed into a kind of creed, almost like a religion, and remained popular for some 400 years. Epicurean communities were founded in places like this all across the ancient world, and it's largely thanks to them that fragments of what Epicurus wrote have survived. I've come with local archaeologist Mustafa Adak to see the ruins of the ancient town of Oynoanda. Oynoanda was once home to 25,000 people, a place with a lavish theatre, a busy marketplace or agora, and a huge aqueduct. It was also home to a follower of Epicurus's philosophy, one of the wealthiest citizens of the town, a man called Diogenes of Oynoanda. Around the AD 120s, this Diogenes took a highly unusual decision. He paid for an enormous wall to be put up, as part of a giant structure known as a stoa, on which he had inscribed Epicurus's entire philosophy of happiness, so that all the citizens of his town could learn and be inspired by it.
So where are we walking now?
We're walking now in the old agora of Alain, where Diogenes had his store.
What we're seeing now is there's these bits of the wall.
The store was broken up by earthquake, most probably, and there are more than 200 fragments of the inscription. This is one of the fragments. This is the beginning of the inscription.
And this is where Diogenes tries to explain why he put up the wall in the first place.
Yes, he's saying that if there were one or two persons who are lost, he could educate them personally. But there are many people, so he decided to put up the stone.
Right, so if there were two people who didn't know how to be happy, he'd go and talk to them, but because there are so many, the best way to help them is to actually put up a wall in the middle of the town.
That's right. That's the explanation he gives here in this fragment.
What a lovely thing to do.
Diogenes was acting on a crucial idea in Epicurus, that in order to live wisely, it isn't enough just to read a philosophical argument once or twice. We need constant reminders of it, or we'll forget. When we're encouraged to go shopping by bright lights and inviting displays, we're quickly liable to lose sight of our true desires. So we have to counteract the influence of advertising by creating advertisements which say what we really do need. And that's why Diogenes put up his wall.
And I think they collapsed. The store collapsed then.
What is this here?
This is another very fascinating fragment.
The massive limestone wall originally stood right next to the marketplace of the town. Inhabitants shopping in the boutiques of Oinoanda were warned to expect little happiness from the activity.
Hedone, happiness.
Luxurious food and drinks, says one fragment, in no way protect you from harm.
200 stones, they are spread around.
Wealth beyond what is natural is no more use than an overflowing container. Real value is generated not by theatres and baths and perfumes and ointments, but by philosophy.
The doctrines of Epicure.
The wall may have crumbled into ruin, but movingly, the ideas inscribed on it retain their life and their relevance.
I mean, it strikes me as a real paradox, really, that you would have had where people are going shopping, they're sort of carrying their shopping, and then on the wall, you've got these reminders that shopping is not necessarily going to make you happy.
Yes, the letters of the inscription were read, so everyone could see them.
Oh, right, so it was all written in red?
In red, yes.
So you really could have seen it. I mean, you could have been at the other side of the marketplace.
Of course.
And you would have seen that there was this basically kind of advertisement almost for Epicureanism on the wall. It must have been a beautiful spot. I mean, to have not only philosophy enlightening you, but also a fantastic view onto the surrounding countryside.
Yes.
I can imagine it would have been easy to be wise. Not easy, but easier to be wise here. I would have done less shopping if I had this wall and this surrounding. It's a pity they didn't do it more, and that they don't do it today. I think it's a lovely idea.
Yes.
Wall philosophy.
Steve, who's creative, is going to take you.
If Epicurus and his followers had been alive today, they wouldn't have been sniffy about advertising. They would have enlisted it for their own ends, and for the same reason that Diogenes built his wall, to counter the constant inducements to go shopping, with some equally visible inducements to live philosophically.
The first ideas were basically just kind of dry and ironic kind of statements like, shop your blues away.
Right.
I've come to the kind of place where Epicureans might have turned, the offices of the advertising agency St. Luke's, to get ideas for creating some modern public reminders of how to live wisely. The first idea their creative team came up with was a sarcastic campaign satirising the materialistic messages of most ads.
Yeah. It is really powerful, and certainly in production terms it takes a number of difficult... It's very, very cheap.
And then even a bit more challenging, be happy with shopping, TV and a yearly holiday.
Right, I love that. That really does sum it all up, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then finally just culminated, I think, in this thought, which I thought was the strongest, which was fill that void in your life with a product.
Yeah, and you'd have sort of shops advertising, shops selling these kind of products, and then this kind of stark reminder that perhaps it's not really going to fill any void. That's brilliant. What else did you find?
Probably the most obvious idea was to just take kind of luxury items and goods and just somehow kind of undermine them or show them for being kind of, you know, a bit shallow or a bit kind of, you know, empty inside. Kind of the best example of that, I thought, it was something like this, just taking, you know, a lovely image of a beautiful house and kind of just using the language of kind of advertising, the caveats, kind of batteries not included, and just changing it to happiness not included.
Right, no, I really like that. I mean, in a way that says it all, doesn't it? It says, because it keeps that subtlety of Epicureanism, which is, you could be happy in a house like that, but it's not included.
Yeah.
And I think that's the subtlety. It's not saying you won't be happy in that, which would be sort of Marxism.
Yeah.
It's just saying it's not included, so you better watch out before you spend all your energies trying to get this house. Unfortunately, philosophers have rarely had much money for advertising campaigns. But imagine a world where instead of being surrounded by adverts selling you watches, cars, or fancy holidays, these ads reminded you of how important it is to value friends, to escape the rat race, or reflect on your problems, and didn't just use these genuinely nice things to sell you aftershave or aperitifs. It's hard to know whether the people of Oinoanda discovered what they did need and ceased buying what they didn't because of the giant advertisement in their midst. But Epicurus' central message seems, if anything, more relevant to today's consumer society than it did to his own. And there's no reason to believe that happiness is any more included in the many more things we can buy. Of course, putting up one poster in the Trafford Centre in Manchester couldn't on its own turn back the tide of consumerism. And although shoppers seemed interested in what my ad was trying to say, I didn't see much evidence of people stopping shopping. But the fact remains, we're horribly confused about what could make us happy. If we really knew what we needed, there are few things we'd be desperate to buy.
Epicurus makes us think very carefully about the merits of our own society. Of course, these societies are enormously wealthy. We can buy almost anything we want in a place like this, full of colourful shops selling wonderfully well-produced goods. And yet, what Epicurus wants us to think is, do places like this really provide us with the key ingredients of happiness? And he thought, and I think he was right, that they don't. Happiness may be difficult to attain, Epicurus admitted that, but he insisted that the obstacles are not primarily financial.
Before I really knew anything about it, I was attracted to the idea of philosophy. I thought of it as a practical subject that could make a real difference, that might have wise things to say about everyday worries, like being rejected in love, or failing in a job, or not having any friends. Philosophy promised something that might sound a little naive, but was in fact rather profound, a way to learn to be happy. And as I found out more, I discovered that there were 6 philosophers I was particularly interested in, because they had the wisest things to say about the areas of life I'd always found rather problematic.
The first problem that I came to Rome to try and find an answer for was anger. And you only have to spend a few minutes in the city to realise that anger is a massive problem.
Modern life is full of frustration, and most of us don't seem able to respond very philosophically to it. We're prone to losing our tempers. Anger seems as much a part of our lives today as bad driving and traffic jams. So it's interesting to discover that in ancient times, anger was felt to be an even greater problem than it is now. Ancient Romans were, if anything, angrier than modern ones.
And we find one ancient philosopher who was particularly concerned with anger and wanted to calm people down. He was born in Cordoba, province of Spain, in 1 AD, and his name was Seneca.
Seneca was the most famous and popular philosopher of his day, the author of more than 20 books of practical advice about all aspects of life. He came to Rome as a boy and spent most of his life here, becoming influential in politics and a member of the Roman Senate. But that doesn't mean that his life was free from frustration. He was naturally a rather melancholy man who suffered from tuberculosis as a youth and was prone to almost suicidal bouts of depression. And he lived in very dangerous times. His political career coincided with the reign of a series of despotic, violent, and unpredictable rulers. Seneca was moving in a world where he literally couldn't know what would happen to him tomorrow. The ground was unstable beneath his feet. In 49 AD, he had to take on, against his will, the most fateful job in the imperial administration, tutor to a 12-year-old boy called Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, the future Emperor Nero. It soon became clear that Nero was a murderous psychopath. Knowing he was in extreme danger, Seneca attempted to withdraw from court. Twice he offered Nero his resignation. Twice the emperor refused, embracing Seneca tightly and saying that he would rather die than harm his beloved tutor. Nothing in Seneca's experience encouraged him to believe such promises.
It's by wandering around the rooms here in Nero's underground palace that you begin to get a sense of just why Seneca was so worried about anger. Nero was a man who had absolute power. People were brought down to these chambers, and the most horrific mass murders went on. He would have Romans thrown to the lions, decapitated, eaten by crocodiles, and torn apart alive. Virgins were seized off the streets of Rome, were brought here, murdered. Gladiators who hadn't performed well were disemboweled and thrown to wolves, all in these underground chambers. It was because the consequences of anger were so great that Seneca was desperate to assuage them. An angry Roman emperor was not just an unpleasant sight, he was potentially a catastrophic phenomenon.
No, you ain't turning right there, mate, are you? Whoa, dodgy.
Having seen so much of it at first hand, Seneca thought anger a terrible problem. He even devoted a whole book entitled On Anger to the subject. The most hideous and frenzied of all emotions, he called it. But, crucially, he refused to see it as an irrational outburst, something over which we had no control.
What kind of things make you really angry? What kind of things make you angry on the road?
Oh, pretty much inconsiderate. Inconsiderate driving, people who don't... Well, they must have passed their test, otherwise they wouldn't be driving like cars. But, I mean, the way they drive doesn't say that they've got any idea about driving in England or driving on any road anywhere, surely. They veer across lanes, they just suddenly have no regard for anybody else, just pull up and park. They can't reverse. You know, they can't park.
So what are your favourite insults? If someone's done something really bad on the road, what do you like to call them?
With gesticulations. Basically just explode for that moment in time, like just clear me air, clear me head.
Have you ever got out of your car and actually hit someone?
I did threaten to hit a geezer. He opened his door to put his seatbelt on.
Yeah.
And like just crumpled his door, but he cut my finger like that. And
Wayne Allingham is a driver with a delivery company. He finds it difficult to control his temper when he's on the road. He doesn't think there's much he can do about it. Seneca would have disagreed.
So he says, oh, I can call the police to see that he's going to hit me. Worth it. I rode myself to the hospital, put the needle through the finger, you have to just squirt blood out. That sort of sobered me up a bit as well. I was pretty angry. Oh, here we go.
What's going on?
Seneca thought that anger was a philosophical problem and amenable to treatment by philosophical argument. Anger arose from certain rationally held ideas about the world.
Oh, mate, there's a car. What's it? That's all right. That's all right.
And the problem with these ideas is that they're far too optimistic.
Where are you going? Can't you see that?
In Seneca's analysis, people get angry because they're too hopeful.
Yeah. Come on, mate. Move it.
Do you think you'd describe yourself more as an optimist or as a pessimist?
Oh, optimist. Gotta be.
Optimist, yeah. But anyway, don't you think that being optimistic, you're permanently expecting that other people are going to drive in a better way? You know, other people can't drive.
No,
It's like to drive.
You can go for days without an incident. You think everything's getting better. The next thing you know, you come out and you see someo's done your van. And if it's a little car and they cut you, think
but
take your life, especially when they got kids in the back.
Hang on.
And
How long have you been driving a van?
A van, 2 years.
I've been driving a van 2 years. Every day.
Yeah.
Every day someone cuts you up, someone does something stupid, right?
Yeah.
And yet every time you get surprised and you get angry. In a way, it's like you're surprised that this thing has happened again. Do you think it might be a good idea to kind of get more pessimistic about other drivers? Because then you sort of calm down about their driving. Like if you told yourself, other people just can't drive.
Whenever we get angry, there's an element of surprise and a sense of self-pitying injustice. What Seneca would say to Wayne is that traffic jams and bad driving are neither unfair nor surprising. They're a predictable feature of life. The person who gets angry about them simply has the wrong expectations of the world. So Seneca's first piece of advice is to be more pessimistic, to adjust our view of the world so as to be less surprised when reversals occur. And he urges us to bear something else in mind too. If we can accept that there's often nothing we can do about our frustrations, we'll be less likely to lose our rag when we encounter them.
Your indicator's on, mate. Your indicator.
Seneca believed that one of the reasons we get so angry is because we imagine that things should basically always go our way, that we should be able to make the world conform to our wishes. But actually, we can't. There are many things that we just have to accept. We're often not free to change things. And in order to try and make us understand this, in order to try and bring this image home, Seneca came up with an unusual idea. He said that all of us are essentially rather like dogs, tied to the back of a moving chariot. Now, the leash is just about long enough to give us some freedom, but it isn't long enough to allow us to move wherever we want. Now, the dog quickly realizes that in order to maximize its chances of happiness, it should at times follow the chariot, or in this case, the bicycle, as the budget was limited. So it's far better, essentially, to follow in a direction where you don't want to go than to kick against something that you can't change. Because then you'll end up not only going where you don't want to go, but also being strangled. But we do have one advantage over animals. We have reason and dogs don't. And this reason gives us a key advantage. It means that we can realize what we can change and what we can't. We may be unable to alter certain events, but we can always change our attitude towards those events. And it's this ability that Seneca believed gave us our distinctive form of freedom. Come on, Flora, necessity commands you to come this way. Come on, come on.
But Seneca isn't just useful for times when we're feeling furious. His philosophy offers us a way to stay calm and collected, whatever life may throw at us. You get a sense of the life Seneca would have led when you wander around the ancient Roman town of Pompeii. He was a rich man, and you might be tempted to imagine that he and his patrician contemporaries enjoyed an easy, untroubled existence. But read Seneca, and you realize how wrong that is. In the midst of luxury, the Roman rich was seething with fury. Seneca came to an interesting analysis of anger from looking at the people around him. He moved in the wealthiest circles in imperial Rome. Many of his friends had large villas in the countryside. They would have had retinues of slaves to prepare the food. There would have been long banquets lasting into the night. Guests would have been seated on gilded couches. Seneca noticed a surprising thing in the world around him, that being rich tended to make people angrier, not calmer. As he put it, prosperity fosters bad tempers. Seneca knew of a man called Vedius Pollio, a high imperial official who once hosted a party. And he had a slave who was carrying a tray of crystal glasses, and this unfortunate slave happened to trip on a piece of marble and dropped the tray of crystal glasses all over the floor. They shattered, and this so angered Vedius Pollio that he ordered the slave to be thrown alive into a pool of lampreys and consumed by these fierce creatures. Now, what was essentially going on in Seneca's analysis was that Vedius Pollio believed in a world in which glasses simply don't get broken. Seneca thought that the problem with rich people like Vedius was that their expectations were absurdly high. And that's as true of the rich today. Watch people at a first-class airline check-in desk, and you realize that people tend to shout more there than at the economy class counter. The wealthier you are, the more expectations you tend to have. And it's when expectations are dashed that fury breaks out. The rich believe their money will insulate them from setbacks and frustrations, and that's one of the absurdest expectations of all. Seneca's philosophy isn't only relevant to those of us who lose our tempers. He thought we all react badly to frustration, and so can all benefit from lowered expectations.
I'm hopeless in the morning. I set my alarm and then I endlessly keep pressing the snooze button. I've only got like 10 minutes to get up. So then I rush along and down at the bus stop, usually kind of twitching, waiting for the bus to come along, because it never comes along. Of course it never comes along when you want to. Usually once I'm on the bus, I can relax to a certain extent, though there is always the traffic problem. And I'll sit there and probably read a manuscript. And then finally get into work and open my emails, look at the sales figures, and look at my diary, think, well, oh my God, I've got to do this or I've got to do that. That's how the day starts. Rick, well, what kind of fiction planning meeting?
Venetia Butterfield is the marketing manager for a publishing company. She finds the stress of her job difficult to cope with. I wondered whether Seneca might help her too.
Okay, bye.
What's your average day like here?
Quite hectic, lots of meetings. Publishers tend to be kind of quite verbose. Authors phone up and they'll suddenly say, is this happening? And then you'll have to check up to see whether it is or not.
And what kind of things stress you out most?
Meetings that drag on.
Yeah.
Like someone will say, can we have a really quick meeting and it'll only be half an hour, and then you're sitting there kind of twitching because it's taken an hour and a half and you're thinking of all the things you've got to do. And
what do you do when you get particularly stressed? You know, when your desk is overflowing with papers,
yes,
as it seems
I
to be
know.
now. What do you actually do to kind of...
what do I do? I run around and get botty.
God. There could be one solution to all this. There might be one solution.
What could the solution be?
Well, our friend Seneca,
yeah.
He had this one idea that he says that what makes us most stressed out is things that take us by surprise. That most stressed, most angry, if a kind of problem looms up that you haven't expected. So if you've told yourself, okay, things probably will go wrong, the art department probably won't get the thing, you know, my assistant will be late, etc., etc. When these things happen, you're kind of prepared for them. And he said, you know, the greatest thing, the greatest way to combat anger and frustration is to be prepared. And that's why he advised this kind of premeditation.
But then you might also kind of stress yourself out even more by imagining all the terrible things that could happen. So before you even get there, you're kind of panicking, thinking, oh my God, this could happen.
Sure.
Whereas my initial reaction is to kind of think, well, no, it's going to be fine, it's going to be okay.
So you calmly prepared yourself, and not in a sort of manic way, but just, if you've just said to yourself, okay, things...
We usually try to reassure people by saying things like, don't worry, it'll be fine. But Seneca believed such cosy advice to be potentially very cruel, because it leaves us unprepared if things turn out not to be okay. So he recommended an opposite strategy, a calm, daily meditation on all the things that might go wrong.
And I think what he was trying to do was simply get us to structure those thoughts, which we sometimes have, so that we'd actually do them every morning.
So you do it every morning?
So you do it every morning.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something you'd like to try, maybe?
Yeah, okay.
Give it a try.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be late for work because I'll get to the bus stop and I'll wait a long time for the bus and it'll finally come. And then what will happen is that the bus driver will be in a bit of a hurry, so he'll slam the brakes down and he'll probably crash into somebody. And so then I'll be late for work, and then I'll be late for a meeting, which starts at 9. And I'll walk in and 20 people will kind of turn around and go. As I kind of predicted, the bus didn't have a crash, but it was really, really late, so I was late and everyone did kind of go. But luckily everyone wasn't too depressed and I didn't get any more work out of it. And I've got a doctor's appointment, just a check-up, but they'll probably say that I've got terminal brain cancer or something like that. Hi, I'm a bit late because I overslept, which is really annoying, so I was planning to get in early and write a presentation for an author, so that's kind of scuppered that plan. I've got a cold, so it'll probably develop into pneumonia or something. And I've got a meeting with UIP, which is a film distributor, about a film tie-in that we're doing. And they'll probably demand loads of money from us, which we don't have, and we'll end up having an argument. Well, I thought I'd kind of sum up my week of being deeply pessimistic every day. I think, in a way, it can be useful. It probably makes you prepare a bit more and realise that you're rushing around a little too much and everything's a little bit too last minute. And it makes you be aware probably of the things that you can affect in your life and the things that you can't. And the things that you can't affect, like the bus or like other people not doing their jobs or other people screwing up or not delivering on time. It makes you perhaps more philosophical about those kind of things.
Of course, Seneca wouldn't suggest to Venetia that she shouldn't ever expect things to go to plan. He would just ask her to be psychologically prepared for a day when they didn't.
Seneca believed that we actually frequently overestimate our capacity to change what is occurring, to change a frustrating situation. And it was in order to remind us constantly of just how many things lie outside of our control that he invoked a goddess. Her name was Fortune. She was to be found represented on the back of many Roman coins, and there were also statues of her throughout Italy. She was represented holding two objects. In one hand, she was holding a cornucopia, a symbol of her power to bestow favors. She held in this cornucopia many of the best things in life. But Fortune also held another object, a far darker object, a rudder, which was a symbol of her power to shift our destinies for the worst. If she was feeling fiendish, and she frequently was, she could, just at the touch of the rudder, destroy our lives, destroy our jobs. She could cause untold headaches for us. She is a symbol of everything that we must accept, both good things but also bad things, that when things go wrong, we shouldn't rant and shout. We should remember that many of our frustrations are in fact the work of this fiendish goddess, whose actions we cannot change. Most of the inhabitants of Pompeii, a small town on the foothills of Mount Vesuvius, believed themselves to be the masters of their own destiny. But there's perhaps no starker reminder of what lies outside our control than the forces of nature. At midday on August 13th, AD 79, they were to discover that Fortune had plans of her own for them.
Within hours, Pompeii was buried beneath scalding volcanic ash. It was a horribly graphic illustration of Seneca's point, that we are never immune from fortune. Even when things look safe, they may rapidly take a disastrous turn for the worse. And the best way to protect ourselves is to be psychologically prepared. We tend to think that the most important thing about philosophers is the books they've written, that this is where all the consolation and wisdom must lie. But the ancients held to the far richer idea that we should also be guided in moments of trouble by the way philosophers actually lived and died. And it's the moment of Seneca's death which has most inspired people ever since. It's been endlessly depicted throughout the centuries in art, literature, and music. In April 65 AD, there was a conspiracy against the Emperor Nero in which Seneca was implicated, though he was probably innocent. Nero sent a centurion to Seneca's villa to command him to kill himself immediately. When his family and friends heard the news, they broke down in tears. But Seneca did not, and his attitude to this disaster has helped to define what we mean when we say that we should take something philosophically. He calmly took a knife and began slitting his veins. Seneca died in the way he urged us all to live.
As he had reminded a friend on the loss of her son, what need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears.
With any luck, nothing so terrible will happen to us. But bad things can happen, and the best way to soften the blows, if they come, is to be prepared. Anger and frustration are essentially irrational responses to setbacks, and the only rational strategy is to stay calm about the fact that things do go wrong. That way will be, in the truest and best sense of the word, philosophical. Cambridge University, graduation day. Another group of brilliant, beautiful, talented young people prepare to go out into the world, there to achieve fame, wealth, and power. The sight of them might fill us with joy. Alternatively, as they file through the courtyards of their ancient colleges to receive their degrees, something about their achievements and their prospects might lead us to a debilitating sense that we're not as bright as we should be, nor as rich, beautiful, talented, and successful. Their behavior on their special day might, quite unintentionally, serve to depress us. If we're struck by such feelings of inadequacy, there is one philosopher to whom we should turn. His name is Michel de Montaigne. Michel de Montaigne was really the most unusual and lovable of philosophers, and I think for one reason in particular. He seems to understand what makes us feel bad about ourselves, and in his book tries to make us feel better. I think he covers about three main areas of what one could call inadequacy. Firstly, a kind of bodily inadequacy, the sense that we aren't comfortable with our bodies, that we feel awkward about them. Secondly, the inadequacy that we might feel when we feel that others are judging us, that our customs and habits are being disapproved of. And thirdly, intellectual inadequacy, the feeling that we're just not as clever as we should be. And for all these three areas, Montaigne came up with highly practical, simple, and I think very helpful solutions. At the summit of a wooded hill in the heart of rural France, some 30 miles east of Bordeaux, stands a handsome castle with views onto oak forests and hayfields. In the 16th century, it was Michel de Montaigne's home. Montaigne was born in 1533, and from the outside, his class and achievements might seem more likely to intimidate us than rescue us from a sense of inadequacy. He was a nobleman, a lawyer, a friend of the King of France, and twice mayor of Bordeaux. But at the age of 38, Montaigne decided to retire to his castle to spend the rest of his life here, reading, reflecting, and writing. At first, he didn't know what to write about, but he gradually hit upon a revolutionary idea: to write a big book on a subject he was uniquely placed to understand, himself. He set out to tell us exactly what it was like to be Michel de Montaigne. When one hears that Montaigne lived in a castle like this, and that he was the mayor of Bordeaux for 2 terms, and that he's a philosopher, one might come across certain sort of prejudices. One might imagine the kind of man he was, the kind of things that we'll find in his book. But I think what's remarkable, and for me deeply moving and charming about his work, his most famous work, the Essays, is that actually its contents are nothing like the typical philosophy book. That Montaigne wanted in this book to, as it were, redraw the whole portrait that we have of what human beings are. Most books didn't seem to Montaigne to really reflect human experience. They edited out all sorts of aspects. What Montaigne wanted to do was to bring these aspects back in, which is why he spends an awful lot of time in his work talking about the kinds of things that most philosophy books leave out. For instance, the penis. He tells us that he wants to talk a lot about his penis. He says, "Every one of my members, each as much as another, makes me myself, and none makes me more properly a man than that one. I owe to the public my portrait complete." And it was Montaigne's goal in his essays to insert into our normal conception of what a human being is all these aspects that are actually a part of our reality but never get mentioned in philosophy books. Montaigne thought we were surrounded by the wrong role models. They don't give space to what most of us are actually like, and this can lead us to self-hatred when we fail to make the grade. Which is why Montaigne spent much time in his book telling us ordinary, everyday things about himself, to encourage us to accept the ordinary in ourselves. It's why he tells us, for example, about his bowel movements, and that he eats so fast he often bites his fingers. Trivia perhaps, but a reminder that there are many humdrum but nevertheless acceptable sides to human nature. As he wrote, "The most terrible and violent of our afflictions is to despise our own beings." Because Montaigne confides in us so much, tells us things we don't normally hear about, like impotence or farting, it's easy to feel him becoming a friend, someone far from the austere, starched image of a philosopher. And as one might visit a friend, I was drawn to visit his chateau, further to foster the sense of almost personal relationship I'd formed with him. Montaigne worked in a tower at one end of his castle. On the ground floor was a chapel. He had the acoustics organized so that he could hear Mass being sung as he lay in bed upstairs. It's moving to come here and to see how unchanged it all is. Here is the very tower which Montaigne was describing in his book hundreds of years ago. It reinforces the sense of personal identification that readers of his essays tend to have. Montaigne loved the sensation of falling asleep, so much so that he'd have the bells of his castle rung in the middle of the night to wake him, so as to have the pleasure of drifting back to sleep. But it was really the top of the tower I'd come to see, for there Montaigne had his study, which he loved and described in detail. It's the perfect place for a bookish man. There used to be a collection of 1,000 books arranged in a semicircle around the walls. There was room to pace. The best thoughts came to him that way, he said, and views onto the gardens. But though this might look like a perfect haven for a remote intellectual, Montaigne remained extraordinarily down to earth. Much of what he tells us has an almost homespun quality to it. So if we believe it, it's because we trust Montaigne as a friend, a man with the courage to speak the great truths with simplicity and with honesty.
Montaigne was a highly unusual philosopher, and in one respect particularly. Most philosophers up until Montaigne had pointed out that having a mind can lead us to happiness, that it's reason which gives us the best chance of fulfillment. Montaigne turned that equation on its head and built a philosophy out of pointing out the extent to which we have problems precisely because we have reason, because we have minds.
And the first problem with having a mind, Montaigne thought, is that it makes for awkward relations with our bodies. Unlike other animals, we're often disgusted by our physical selves. We think we're too fat or gross or uncouth. We develop eating disorders, sexual hang-ups and embarrassments. Montaigne observed many people around him afflicted by physical shame. He knew a man who killed himself after letting out a cacophony of farts at a banquet. He met a woman who was so embarrassed to chew in public that she always ate behind a curtain. And another man he knew ordered that he be buried in his underpants for fear that anyone should ever see his penis. He ought to have remembered to blindfold the undertakers, added Montaigne. Montaigne knew what the problem was. It's because the body is so rarely mentioned in polite company, let alone in philosophy books, that we think of it as embarrassing and shameful. He urged us to accept as an in no way awkward fact that we are half animal. We have to see how much we have in common with the creatures of the farmyard. Kings and philosophers shit, he reminded us, and so do ladies.
Montaigne's chateau was, of course, a working farm, so he had plenty of opportunity to look at animals. And Montaigne came away from his observation of animals with an interesting point. He said, they often surpass us in wisdom. He believed that animals are in many ways far cleverer than we are. For example, animals are far more natural with their bodies than we are. They don't have many of the embarrassments, the shynesses, the shames that we have. They have a much more natural relationship. And what's particularly striking is that here, towards the end of the 16th century, is a philosopher who's saying animals are in many ways our equals. And this is an extremely striking thing to say, and I think a very touching thing to say. Montaigne was very endeared by them, placed them at the centre of his philosophy, saw them as exemplars of a kind of wisdom which he believed we should imitate.
Montaigne wasn't reminding us of our place in the farmyard to degrade us, rather to help us to grow more acceptable to ourselves. We should accept our bodies with good grace and a touch of humour, as naturally as animals do. It's a simple thought, but there's no reason why things should be complicated in order to be true. And it's only the first of many blunt but helpful truths this most down-to-earth of philosophers has to teach us.
Having a big brain isn't just a problem, Montaigne thought, because it leads us to feel ashamed of our bodies. It's also a very big problem because it leads us to feel arrogant, to think that we know what's right, and to impose that vision on other people.
Every society has its ideas about what is normal, what it's normal to eat or wear or say. And if you stray from these in some way, you're quickly liable to come up against all sorts of narrow-mindedness and prejudice, to be accused of being weird and made fun of, or worse. Imagine, for example, that your favourite foods don't tend to crop up on the typical British menu.
Hello, can I just sit down for a second? Yes. What do you think of eating something a bit sort of different? Like we've got some food from around the world here. That's a wonderful goat's head. They tend to eat that in the Caribbean. And that's some pig snout, which is very beautiful. That's from South America. And here we've got some chicken feet that are from China.
No, thank you. Really.
Do you think that's something that you might like to have?
I'm vegetarian, so
You're vegetarian, right.
But
we've got some things here that don't often appear on the menu.
Of course, we all divide the world up into the normal and the abnormal.
It doesn't look appealing.
I'm much too conservative.
It's not normally on the menu.
Eat it like that.
Yeah,
It doesn't much matter when just pub food is at stake.
I mean, that's what you'd have, you know, for Sunday lunch or... Yeah.
But Montaigne had graphic evidence to hand of how people sometimes behave towards those who don't share their customs. Some 40 years before Montaigne's birth, Columbus sailed to the New World. Montaigne had these very pictures to look at to show him how the Spanish colonists behaved towards those who they found there. They slaughtered the natives in enormous numbers.
During Montaigne's own lifetime, the numbers of native South Americans dropped from 80 to 10 million. Unusually for a European of his day, Montaigne was appalled by the colonists and identified wholly with the Indians. But he argued that the intolerance the conquistadors had shown was everywhere. People constantly rashly decide what is normal and what is abnormal and persecute those who don't fit. The prejudice the Indians had encountered, we are all liable to face, in far less catastrophic ways, the day we stray from the customs of our own countries.
So, what should we do if we encounter the prejudices of others? In a word, go travelling, either in reality or in our minds. We should go out and greet the diversity of the world.
Hello.
And that way we'll see that what one society judges to be weird, another society might more fairly judge to be normal.
¿Qué tal?
Every country has its prejudices,
Llora.
but travel between countries loosens the grip of any one prejudice. It's not just that travel broadens your mind.
Hola.
Rather, it enables you to see more clearly how narrow your oppressors' minds are.
Selamat datang.
Montaigne was no bland multiculturalist.
Konnichiwa.
He wasn't saying that all cultures are as good as one another.
Merhaba.
He was just attacking the way that people decide what is good and bad, on the basis of habit rather than reason.
Hello. Hello.
With a more global perspective on our behaviour, we will grow more accepting, not only of others, but also of aspects of ourselves. We will gain less constraining identities as citizens of the world.
Straight to the camera, nice big smiles. 3, 2, 1.
It isn't simply others being judgmental which makes us feel inadequate. Another area in which many of us feel we're not up to scratch is the intellectual one, the painful sense that we simply aren't as clever as we should be. This is Gonville and Keyes College, part of Cambridge University.
This is a photo of me graduating a few years ago. I had a lot more hair then than I do now. These are supposedly some of the cleverest people in the whole country. I say supposedly because once you start looking at a phenomenon like Cambridge University through Montaigne's eyes, you quickly begin to see things in a rather different way.
In Montaigne's day, you needed certain things to be deemed clever. First and foremost, a university degree.
For the honour of the college.
But however much our society, and Montaigne's own, associates intelligence with academic qualifications, Montaigne had some blunt words on the matter. To him it seemed that most university graduates were, despite the gowns and fancy certificates, in his words, just blockheads.
That's fine for one.
He wasn't being puerile, just insisting that the outward symbols of intelligence are often different from the reality.
The kind of intelligence that Montaigne was really keen on, he called wisdom. And importantly, he said that one could be wise without ever having gone to a university like this. All that you need in order to be wise, he thought, is a certain humility, modesty, and an acceptance of your intellectual limitations. Wise people don't always need to know everything. They can also accept that many events are out of their control. They accept the limitations as much of their minds as of their bodies.
Montaigne knew many people around his chateau who were simple ploughmen with no formal education whatsoever, and long acquaintance with them persuaded him that these people were often far wiser than university graduates. Montaigne certainly didn't think that all learning was useless. He was simply observing that many people who go to university aren't any happier or wiser than those who don't. And from my own experience, I think he may have a point.
what Montaigne was essentially telling us is that you come to a place like this, you will get very good at remembering lots of facts, you will pick up a lot of information, but you won't necessarily be able to apply it to your life. And I certainly missed out on many lessons of life here. If I was designing my ideal curriculum, I think I would take a leaf from Montaigne's book and say that actually many of the most important topics aren't covered here and should be. I'm thinking of topics like how to live well and happily with other people, how to confront one's anxieties, how to deal with death, even banal questions, or potentially banal questions like how to end a relationship. These are not the kinds of questions that we're encouraged to ask here, and in a way, perhaps we should be.
Coming back has also given me a chance to put some of Montaigne's points to a rather forbidding figure from my past, the master of my old college, Mr. McKendrick.
Montaigne has this quote in which he says he's looking out of the window of his chateau, and he says, many of the people that I see ploughing the soil around my chateau are in fact better, happier and wiser than people who I've known in the universities of Paris. What do you make of that?
Well, I know there's a romantic myth of peasant job satisfaction, roses around the door, and I think that myth is one of the plagues of our society, that we're all happier when we are poorer and dying at 27 and owning nothing and labouring in a ditch throughout February and so on. I don't buy that.
But how about another aspect of the myth, which is that we might be happier if we had studied less?
You're trying to tell me that I'd be happy if I did less of what I do. That's what I do. So I'm extremely sceptical, not to say mocking, of that particular view.
Do you think that people who graduate from here end up happier than people who perhaps have never been to university at all?
It's difficult to answer that with any certainty, but I like to think they do. I like to think that they do look back fondly on their years. And I think the great majority look back nostalgically and appreciatively.
Montaigne, of course, recognised that some people are cleverer than others. It's just the way that our society identifies them which is wrong. In particular, there's something wrong with the exam system. It rewards the wrong things, learning rather than wisdom.
The paper this morning is an examination in wisdom.
So what would an examination that Montaigne could approve of be like? How could one test for wisdom rather than its pale shadow, learning? I had a go at designing such a paper, and Mr. McKendrick let me set it to some of his students.
Students must answer 5 of the following questions. Factual accuracy, while desirable, will not overly impress the examiners. You may now start writing.
I asked questions like, what should one do when anxious? What is a good parent? How can one tell if one is in love or infatuated? And should one worry what other people think? Most students today are not asked to sit examinations in wisdom, but perhaps they should be. The education system today, rather like the one in 16th century France in Montaigne's time, makes some people feel very stupid when they aren't, while making other people feel very clever when perhaps they aren't either. Montaigne didn't want to do away with the distinction between intelligence and stupidity. He simply wanted to adjust the way that we made that distinction. It's quite possible to be able to write a very brilliant essay, to remember lots of facts, to present an argument cogently, and not be wise, while at the same time one might lack all of these intellectual disciplines and yet be very wise. A cheering idea we take away from Montaigne is that academic qualifications are not the sole or even the chief determinants of intelligence. There are ways of being clever that top universities don't recognize, and ways of being stupid. And if that doesn't help us over feelings of intellectual inadequacy provoked by people with impressive degrees, Montaigne had one final tip. We should take a moment to imagine them sitting on the toilet. As he noted, even on the highest throne, we are seated still upon our arses.
If we take away one lesson from Montaigne, it's about the dangers of being intellectually arrogant. And Montaigne, when he was writing in his study, had one way of trying to keep his own feet on the ground. He had a set of 57 short inscriptions, culled from the classics and the Bible, painted up on the ceiling, so that when he was writing, he could look up and be reminded of some essential truths. Here we have a quote, it says,
Have you ever seen a man who thinks he is wise? You have more to hope for from a madman than from him. And over here there's another quote I very much like. It says, "Do not be wiser than necessary, but be wise in moderation. Everything is too complicated for men to be able to understand. The happiest life is to be without thought. I am a man, nothing human is foreign to me. The man who thinks he knows does not yet know what knowing is. Why torment yourself with worries that are outside your control? There is nothing certain but uncertainty, nothing more miserable and more proud than man." Montaigne was inviting us not to be humiliated by aspects of ourselves, our bodies, our idiosyncrasies, our lack of formal education. We can fart at dinner, eat pig snouts, and never have read a book, and still be quite fully human. What makes Montaigne different is that his message stems from a man we can trust as a friend and admire as a role model, one of the first and only philosophers with a reassuringly down-to-earth idea of what it is to be a good human being. We all have an idea of the happiness that love will bring us. Most of us put the search for love at the very centre of our lives. And yet it's a subject on which philosophy is strangely silent. Given that few of our experiences feel more life-changing or more important, one might have thought that philosophers would take love very seriously, but on the whole they haven't. They see it as a subject that's probably better left to poets, hysterics, and chat show hosts on daytime TV. But there was one philosopher who did take love very seriously. He saw it as one of our central concerns. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer. In an admittedly rather unromantic field, Schopenhauer is the one philosopher who seems to understand the intensity of what we feel when we fall in love. He thought we were absolutely right to build our lives around love. Nothing else in life was quite as important. But the mistake he thought we made was to imagine that happiness had anything to do with it.
Dear Michelle, I can't do this anymore. You know what you want, and I know that I do not want to marry you. It's unfair on you and me to continue anymore. I'm so unhappy in the relationship, which I didn't know that. I thought he was happy. And it seems that however hard I try to look into the future positively, the situation does not feel right. By the time you read this, I'll have left for a month or two travelling. It's so hard, but I'm not the right one for you, nor you for me.
That's terrible. So...
And then a P.S. Please don't try and call, it's too upsetting. And I haven't seen or spoken to him since.
So what was your first reaction when you read this?
I just burst into tears. What do you expect? I chucked myself in the loo and cried.
You got a letter? Michelle Hutchison's boyfriend of 4 years left this letter, along with all her things from his flat, in a plastic bag at reception where she works. And did you try and call him? You didn't have any way of getting in touch with him?
No, I did. I knew his numbers. But I didn't want to speak to him after that. I thought, this is it. I can't get myself out of this situation. I can't make him want me if that's so obviously clear that he doesn't want me.
Tell me a bit more about him. I mean, what's he like? What does he do? How did you meet? That sort of thing.
We met through a friend of mine that I lived with at university, and she introduced us to a party, and I practically moved in on the first date.
How come?
Because it was the summer holidays. So I just finished my degree, and he said come down for the weekend, and I actually never left. We went back and got the rest of my stuff, and I ended up living there.
And was it kind of legendary love at first sight? Did you lay eyes on him and you just thought?
It was for me. At this party we were walking across the field, and I just felt so comfortable with him.
Do you think that he loved you?
I think he did.
So in that case, why this letter, if he loved you? I mean, I'm not saying he didn't.
He loved me, but love isn't enough, is it?
At first glance, it's hard to believe that Schopenhauer could really understand the pain that Michelle is going through, or have anything helpful to say to anyone in her situation. He never married, lived alone, and was often bitterly misogynistic. But go to Frankfurt and take a look around the Schopenhauer archive with archivist and keeper of the Schopenhauer in Flame, Joachim Stolberg. There, amongst the rather poignant bits and pieces of Schopenhauer's life, you begin to get a picture of a man who truly deserves the title of philosophy's Dr. Love. Schopenhauer was born in Danzig in 1788, but spent most of his life here in Frankfurt. From an early age, he looked to love for happiness. He was intelligent, confident, good-looking, and after his father died when he was 17, extremely rich.
That's him. That's the great man.
But success with women eluded him.
And his own signature. And that's the earliest. That's the earliest photo that we have of him. With a moustache. I've forgotten the German for moustache again. What's German for moustache?
Schnauzbart.
Schnauzbart. So he's got a Schnauzbart on. And he's how old?
Schnurrbart.
Schnurrbart.
Ja.
And how old is he there?
21.
What, 21? And he's writing his thesis.
Vincesimo primo.
He's writing his thesis. He's interested in women. He's trying to meet them, but has problems meeting them.
Okay.
Back. Was he attractive to women? War attraktiv für Frauen?
Vielleicht, ja.
Kleiner?
Ja, kleiner als wir. Kleiner,
ja?
Kleiner
Viel,
als wir.
Viel kleiner.
Viel kleiner. Man sieht es an dem Spazierstock.
Okay.
Wir können ihn herausnehmen.
So he was quite a small philosopher, which meant that anyone with theories of small men has plenty to feed on with Schopenhauer.
Die Handschrift von Caroline Medon.
So these are the letters from Caroline Medon, who was his...
In 1821, at the age of 33, he did meet a woman who liked him, a 19-year-old singer called Caroline Medon. But he was never comfortable enough in the relationship to settle down.
Mein lieber Arthur. So she was very warm. She wasn't desperate. She had choice, but she fell in love with him. And they had a child together. She was very keen on marriage, but he didn't want to.
He told her that two people to get married means to do everything possible to become an object of disgust to one another.
Mein innigst geliebter, guter Arthur.
Ever warmer letters.
After 10 stormy years, the relationship broke up. Schopenhauer continued to search for love, but with ever less success. In 1831, he developed a passion for Flora Weiss, a beautiful, spirited girl who had just turned 17. During a boating party, in an attempt to charm her, Schopenhauer started talking to her about his philosophy. He smiled and offered her a bunch of grapes. Flora later confided in her diary, "I didn't want them. I felt revolted because old Schopenhauer had touched them, so I let them slide quite gently into the water behind me." Towards the end of his life, he did enjoy a contentment of sorts with an attractive sculptress and admirer of his philosophy, Elizabeth Nye, who came to Frankfurt to make a bust of him. But it was hardly the culmination of the happy romantic life that the young Arthur Schopenhauer had dreamt of.
She's quite pretty. Did he like her?
Es scheint so. Und hat so intime Dinge geäußert, wie dass glücklich gewesen sei, auf dem Sofa gemeinsam mit der Künstlerin Kaffee zu trinken.
They had a very happy time when Elizabeth was making this portrait of him, sculpture of him. They had a lovely time. They sat on the sofa and had coffee together.
Yeah.
And they behaved like a married couple, he said.
Ja.
And did he like this portrait of him? Was he proud
Schopenhauer hat es sehr geliebt, dieses Porträt.
He really liked it. But his friends seemed to notice that there was a disparity between his head, which looks very much the head of a 71-year-old, and the body, which looks like a sort of athletic, wie 21 wäre, as though he was a 21-year-old hero. No wonder he liked it.
So how could this romantically hapless philosopher have anything wise to tell us about love? Well, for a start, he tells us that love is not a trivial subject. We shouldn't see it as a distraction from more important or grown-up concerns. It's no accident that love is such an overwhelming emotion, that it can take over our lives and fill our every waking moment. And Schopenhauer urges us not to be too hard on ourselves for the obsession and despair it can drive us to when it goes wrong. To be surprised at how much rejection hurts is to ignore just what acceptance would have involved. Nothing in life is more important than love, thought Schopenhauer, because nothing less than the survival of our species is at stake. We all tell ourselves stories about love. We imagine when we fall for someone that we're finding a partner who's going to make us happy. But Schopenhauer saw it very differently. He thought that we put ourselves through the self-conscious phone calls and the expensive candle-lit dinners for one reason only: an overwhelming biological drive to propagate the species. He called it the will to life. Love is a cunning ruse designed by biology to push us towards having children. However romantic we like to think we are all essentially slaves of the will to life.
Do you think you've come here to propagate the species? Do you think you've come here to propagate the species?
I don't think so, no.
Every Friday and Saturday night, people flock to nightclubs like this. It wouldn't have been Schopenhauer's kind of place. He hated loud noise, but he would have known exactly why so many of us might want to spend our evenings here. Although it might be deeply uncomfortable for us to accept, although it violates our rational self-image, and although it's deeply un-PC to say so, we are all driven here by a blind biological urge to reproduce.
Tell me why you've come here tonight, honestly.
For a cheesy night out and to grab some filthy birds.
Right. Do you think you've come here to propagate the species?
I don't really feel like propagating the species at this moment in time in my life.
Right, so it's completely unconnected to that, you think? You haven't come here to do that?
Myself personally, no, I haven't, no.
Good. I think what was key for Schopenhauer is that the will to life can operate, but in a rather unconscious way, so that people are consciously driven to come to a club like this, to have a drink and to have a laugh with friends, or unconsciously driven by a need to reproduce the next generation. When confronted with the question, are you doing this, they'll of course reject it. But Schopenhauer didn't think that that meant that it wasn't actually driving them. It was, but in order for the will to life to be effective, it has to remain unconscious, because no one would consciously take on the burden of reproducing the next generation. What's going on in there that makes you want to hang out here?
Because we live like we're just going quite for a shag.
They're looking for a shag? Really? Can I ask you why you've come here tonight?
You want the honest answer?
Yeah.
Full of birds.
To pull a bird?
Yeah.
You might well object that the last thing on your mind when you ask someone for their phone number in a bar is having a baby. But Schopenhauer insisted that this was precisely what was motivating us, unconsciously. The very moment when two young people fancy one another should be considered as the birth of a new individual, he wrote. His theory explains the intensity with which we feel drawn to the people we fancy. But why do we fancy certain individuals and not others? One of the profoundest mysteries of love is why him or why her? Why do we fall in love with the people we do? Huge numbers of people leave us cold, even though they may, on paper, be perfect for us. And just as strangely, we find ourselves falling in love with other people who might be quite tricky to live with. Schopenhauer had an answer. Whenever we fall in love with someone, we do so because we unconsciously sense that they'll help us to make healthy, well-balanced children. Love is nothing more than our will to life discovering someone who it thinks will make an ideal co-parent. This led Schopenhauer to some interesting thoughts about the rules of attraction. We're driven to fall in love with people who will cancel out any imperfections we may have, and so ensure that our children are proportioned in limb and stable of mind. Very tall people will tend to be drawn to short people, so that their children won't turn out to be giants. And people with big chins will be attracted to people with small chins, so that their children's chins will be ideal. He even believed that this search for balance extended to skin colour, and that the natural human colour was brown. Some of Schopenhauer's ideas might seem a bit fanciful now. One wouldn't necessarily put him in charge of a dating agency. And there are all sorts of emotional and sexual relationships which he leaves out. But a generation before Darwin and some 60 years before Freud, he was the first to point out that there are largely unconscious biological reasons why we fall in love. The lover who saves our child from having an enormous chin or from being excessively shy is seldom a person to make us happy for a lifetime. The pursuit of happiness and the production of children are two radically different projects, which love maliciously confuses us into thinking of as one, for as long as it takes to spawn and bring up the kids. Only much later, as our healthy, well-balanced offspring are kicking a ball around the garden, will we realize that we've been fooled? We'll divorce or pass family dinners in hostile silence. Schopenhauer offered us a stark choice. It seems as if in making a marriage, either the individual or the interest of the species must come off badly. And he left no doubt that he thought it would be the individual who would suffer most. Unhappy in love, his work almost universally ignored, Schopenhauer withdrew into a modest bachelor apartment in a street in Frankfurt called Schöne Aussicht, an ironic name given the bleakness of his views, as it means beautiful outlook in German.
In an otherwise quite miserable life, one of his joys was music. Before we had lunch, he normally played about an hour of Rossini, and on something like that. Can you play? Können Sie spielen?
Nein, ich kann nicht.
Gar nicht.
Und ich glaube, sie sind auch jetzt nicht bespielbar.
Probably that you couldn't play them anymore.
Solche Instrumente müssen immer gespielt werden.
Still, I mean, these are his marks of his mouth.
Ja.
He grew almost comically pessimistic, advising his few readers to swallow a toad every morning to ensure that they wouldn't meet with anything more disgusting in the day ahead.
Wir können jetzt hier nicht Rossini.
We're not going to play Rossini here, sadly.
Human existence, he wrote, must be a kind of error. It may be said of it, it's bad today, and every day it will get worse until the worst of all happens.
Das sind alle in Englisch, in Griechisch und Anzeichen.
It's safe trusting fear than faith. It's safer trusting fear than faith. A typically gloomy Schopenhauerian comment.
Schopenhauer's closest relationships were now with a succession of poodles. He lavished affection on them. He even called one of them Atma, after the world soul of the Brahmins, and he took a keen interest in animal welfare. Towards the very end of his life, his ideas did finally begin to find an audience, and his last book, a somber collection of philosophical essays and aphorisms, became an unlikely bestseller. Philosophically minded Frankfurters began to buy poodles in homage to him.
So the brain is the center of attention, Rather unusually, the light falls on his head. It's the most important part of the philosopher, not necessarily his eyes or his mouth, but his.
Und den Spiegel der Seele, die Augen.
He looks very intelligent. In the height of his fame, he said that the Nile had at last reached Cairo. That's how he described his fame.
But he had little time to enjoy the attention and develop more cheerful thoughts. In 1860, after a walk by the banks of the River Main with his beloved poodle, Schopenhauer returned home, complained of breathlessness, and died. If a god made this world, he said, then I would not like to be the god. Its misery and distress would break my heart. It might seem odd to say that Schopenhauer could have anything helpful to tell us about love, given that he was such a misery himself. But I think he has some very consoling things to say. Firstly, he tells us that we simply have no choice but to fall in love. Biology is stronger than reason, and so we're not unhappy by accident. In essence, we're just like all other creatures in the zoo. We're impelled to find a mate, to spawn offspring and to bring them up, and only a force as strong as love could get us to do so.
Schopenhauer took a particular interest in very ugly creatures like moles and aardvarks, and these wild dwarf monkeys. What interested him was the way that these creatures' lives are often extremely hard. They have to survive very harsh winters, they have to live in horrible little underground caves, and they have children that look rather like gelatinous worms, and yet that doesn't stop them trying very, very hard to reproduce. In fact, we see a couple of these wild monkeys having a go at reproduction over there. And he thought that we should take a lesson from our own behavior from these creatures, which is that we're devoted to reproduction without necessarily thinking about happiness, or rather we think we're doing this for happiness, but rather like monkeys, we're doing so because we have to, because of the will to life. So if reproduction makes us sad, if we don't feel that our marriages have gone well, we should draw a lesson from these creatures here in the cave. And they're doing it not for happiness, but because they have to, because of the will to life.
Schopenhauer has another message about love which I think is particularly helpful for us when we've been rejected. We often can't understand why our partner has ended a relationship and take it extremely personally. But Schopenhauer tells us that when someone dumps us, it's not us that they're rejecting. It's not that we're unlovable. It's just that their will to life thinks that they'll be able to produce more balanced, healthier children with someone else. And someone else will come along whose will to life thinks we'd be ideal for that purpose, even if only because our nose and their nose will make a desirable combination. We might have been happy with the person who rejected us, but nature wasn't. And for that reason, we have to learn to let them go.
Do you think you'll go out with a different kind of man next?
Not necessarily.
You haven't been out with anyone since?
No.
Does the thought even, it's just horrific?
The thought just makes me panic, the thought of risking everything all over again, and I gave so much into that relationship that I can't imagine.
Was it the most important thing in your life?
Definitely was. Yeah, I would have given up everything for that person.
What way, everything? What, you would have moved country?
I would have moved country, I'd have left my job, and I absolutely loved my job. I would have done anything.
Anything more or less that he told you that was right for the relationship? Huge sacrifice. I think one nice thing is, if someone knows you and then they reject you, you tend to think, well, they've known my personality.
They know you inside out.
They know me inside out, and they've said no.
Yeah.
Which is horrible. I mean, they haven't just taken a casual glance, they've taken a deep glance, and they've said no. And I think what Schopenhauer says is, in a way, they have only taken a casual glance, because really what they're looking at is not your psychological self, but as it were, your biological self. That in a sense, the end of most relationships occur in the conscious mind as, I no longer fancy this person. And what that really means is, they're not really right for me for children. You know, at that level, it is very animal, and so we mustn't interpret it consciously, and we mustn't take it personally.
That I can't have the person I want. Isn't that sad?
It is sad. It is sad.
Isn't that tragic?
No, it is tragic. It is tragic. But maybe in a way, there's a certain consolation in becoming aware of the tragic forces of nature. That in a way, you know, and seeing, sort of rise, you know, rather like being in an airplane, looking down on the world and thinking, well, you know, this is the crazy world we live in.
traditional view is that this couple will live happily ever after. The cynical, modern view is that they're doomed to recrimination and a quick divorce. Schopenhauer asks us to consider a different view, that happiness is simply not the point, any more than it is for porcupines or mongoose. He didn't mean to depress us, rather to free us from the kinds of expectations which can inspire bitterness. It's consoling when love has made us sad, to hear that happiness was never really part of the plan. The darkest thinkers can sometimes, paradoxically, be the most cheering.
I've one last question, which my will to life is asking me to ask you, which is, are you free for dinner tonight? Would you be free for dinner tonight?
Maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
We all have dark periods in our lives. We all face difficulties that seem insurmountable. We all encounter setbacks. And when we do, we're often tempted to throw in the towel. Most philosophers have tried to help us to reduce the amount that we suffer. They've offered consoling advice on how to make the pain go away. But there was one philosopher with a far more bracing take on the subject. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that all varieties of suffering and failure were to be welcomed by anyone seeking happiness. We should regard them as tough challenges to be overcome, in the same way as a climber might tackle a mountain. Almost alone among philosophers, he thought it was an advantage to have serious reversals in life. He wrote, "To those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill-treatment, indignities, profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, and the wretchedness of the vanquished." And to understand what Nietzsche meant, it helps to scale one of his favorite mountains, Piz-Corvatsch, high in the Swiss Alps.
I'm now standing on the top of Piz-Corvatsch, and the view is extraordinary, sublime. There's a complete stillness in the air. Clouds are just drifting over us. We can see clouds below us, and then through the clouds, villages and forests. You feel like you're on the top of the world, and the air is curiously light, and you feel a kind of elated feeling. And I think that here we can start to understand why Nietzsche placed such an emphasis on the tops of mountains. It's at the very top of the mountain that come the finest views, but it's of course extremely hard to get to them. And this is symptomatic of his view that to reach anything that's worthwhile, to reach anything that's valuable, you have to go through an extraordinary amount of effort.
Friedrich Nietzsche certainly knew a lot about effort, both physical and mental. His life was one of exceptional hardship. He constantly struggled against illness, dizziness, headaches, vomiting, probably all symptoms of the syphilis he picked up in a Cologne brothel as a student. He was forced on a restless journey around Europe in search of somewhere where the climate wouldn't upset his delicate constitution. And the place that best agreed with him was Sils Maria, high in the mountains in the southeastern corner of Switzerland. Nietzsche came here for the first time in June 1879 and immediately fell in love with the place. "I now have Europe's best and mightiest air to breathe," he wrote. "Its nature is akin to my own." He spent 8 summers in Sils Maria, living in this barely furnished room rented from a farmer. It was here that he worked on some of his most important books, including Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, and Twilight of the Idols. But his work enjoyed little success in his lifetime. Although he'd been made a professor by the age of 24, he was completely out of tune with his colleagues and was finally forced to retire at the age of 35. For the rest of his life, he had very little money, and the many books he worked on here went largely unread. He lived a life of routine. He would rise at 5 in the morning, write until midday, and then take walks up the huge peaks that necklace the village. But he didn't just live amongst the mountains for the air and the nice views. The landscape he saw around him spoke to his deepest sense of himself and his work. Philosophy, he declared, is a voluntary living in ice and high mountains. Nietzsche's love life was as disastrous as his professional career. All his attempts to seduce women were in vain. Many were frightened by his large moustache, and he confessed to feelings of appalling loneliness. He wrote to a married friend, "Thanks to your wife, things are 100 times better for you than for me. You have a nest together. I have, at best, a cave." Nietzsche immersed himself in philosophy, but his working life was cruelly cut short. He ended his days in madness, having famously broken down and embraced a horse in Turin in 1889. He returned to his boarding house, danced naked, thought of shooting the Kaiser, and believed himself to be, amongst others, Jesus, Napoleon, Buddha, the King of Piedmont, and Alexander the Great. He was bundled into a train to Germany and put into an asylum, where he was looked after by his sister and his elderly mother until he died 11 years later at the age of 56. A key lesson that Nietzsche's life of hardship taught him was that any worthwhile achievement was born out of constant struggle and hard work. Though we sometimes suppose that success comes easily and naturally to some people, there was no such thing as a straight path to the top in Nietzsche's eyes. "Don't talk about giftedness or inborn talents," he wrote. "One can name all kinds of very great people who were not very gifted. They acquired greatness. They became geniuses. And they did so by overcoming difficulties." It's a lesson that the ballerina exemplifies. Monica Perego is a principal dancer with the English National Ballet.
It takes a lot of work, also dedication. It's a job that you do for love, really. And basically it's just a lot of practicing the same step over and over again until you get it right and you make it seem effortless. And a lot of pain in the body, of course, because it's a lot of strain for the muscles. And pain on the feet, obviously, because you've got these lovely pointe shoes on, which look really nice, but they're quite painful sometimes.
How much does it hurt? I mean, it's hard to imagine.
Well, it depends. You go through phases, really, but you do get a lot of blisters, and you do get aches and pains all the time.
All the time?
Oh, yeah, pretty much, especially backs and, I mean, it's personal, but backs and calves, and that's the worst. And, of course, blister on the toes, and, you know, yellow nails. They sound disgusting.
What's a yellow nail?
Well, basically bruised nails.
Oh, right, bruised toenails.
toenails.
So, yeah.
And do they bleed as well? Do your feet ever
no,
bleed?
Well, yeah, just with blisters. I had actually 2 toenails coming off as well.
Goodness me.
And for example, we were at the Royal Albert Hall in June, and I've been off sick for a while, and I had to come back and go straight into Swan Lake rehearsal. And so my feet weren't used to it. So I had about 10 blisters on my toes, and I had to perform, with like blood and, loads of paddings and try to not to feel the pain. But of course, you always feel it.
Nietzsche said that without pain, without going through pain, there could never be any gain, and that anything that's worthwhile doing in life is going to take you through some awful things. Do you think that's right?
It's right in our career, for sure. Definitely. Because it is so straining, but the satisfaction at the end of a performance or at the end of someone's career, it's so amazing that no aches and pain would, take that amazement away from it,
The pain was worth it.
Oh yes, definitely.
At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy is a simple idea. Difficulty is normal. We shouldn't panic or give up when we experience it. We feel pain because of the gap between who we are at the moment and the person we could ideally be. It's because we can't master the ingredients of happiness straight away that we suffer as much as we do. But Nietzsche didn't think it was enough just to suffer. If hardship was all it took in order to be fulfilled, then all of us would be happy. The challenge is to learn to respond well to suffering, perhaps to use it to create something beautiful. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the few philosophers to speak of the virtues of hardship and failure. He thought that we could all potentially benefit from them. Paul Brown ran a drinks distribution company outside Manchester, which went bankrupt last year. He's now back in business, but the experience of failure changed his life for the better.
But as a person, do you think as you come in here every morning, do you think you're slightly different because you've had this experience?
Yeah, I'm in earlier for a start.
Yeah.
But no, I don't let the little problems, I don't let them get on top of me.
Yeah.
It's a little problem. It'll go away. You don't take it into it's like massive, like it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
The end of the world happened, a couple of months ago, and it failed. And suddenly there's a new world. So, it hasn't ended at all. So you don't think a problem is the end of the world, so.
So in a way, you don't panic as much because you think, well, I've been through the worst has happened, and I came through it.
Yeah, you do. Because, it's not as bad. It really isn't as bad, as what everyone makes out, Yeah. Failing is horrible. I wouldn't like anyone to fail, but have the experience of failing. Have the feeling of the experience of failing, at least, because that's horrible. But try not to fail, But everyone fails, I suppose.
Yeah.
So.
And yet, I don't know, I always think this is something interesting that Nietzsche says, is that we slightly live in a culture where failure is not spoken of. It's like there are these failures and sort of that's just this freakish thing that happens to a few people and let's not talk about them. And then there's success. But somehow the two are not brought together. And I think what's quite interesting is to think in every life, even a good life, even a successful life, is going to involve some failure at some level. Not necessarily a huge level, but at some level.
Well, how would you be able to judge your success if you haven't failed? Yeah?
Paul's experience in many ways confirms Nietzsche's analysis of the benefits of failure. However, Nietzsche's point is more subtle. He didn't think that having failed was in itself enough. All lives have failures in them. What makes some lives fulfilled as well is the manner in which failure has been met. It's a surprising fact about Nietzsche that for a time he wished to abandon the bookish life in favour of becoming a full-time gardener. The plan never really came off, but cultivating plants taught him an important lesson.
Nietzsche thought that we should look at many of our problems like gardeners. Now, gardeners come across a lot of plants with very ugly roots. If we take this one, I think it's a particular monster. Look at that, fairly ugly. But what gardeners are able to do is to cultivate something that looks initially very ugly into something very beautiful. Look at this, rather stunning. And Nietzsche thought this was a kind of metaphor for what we should do in our own lives. That is, take situations that look initially very horrible, very dark, and grow out of them something beautiful.
There's something very uplifting about Nietzsche's botanical view of our problems. Even our most negative, ugly, dark feelings can be cultivated to produce something fruitful. but it's entirely up to us to make this happen. Envy, for example, might just lead to bitterness, but could, if properly trained, spur us on to compete with a rival and produce something wonderful. Anxiety might make us panic, or it might blossom into an accurate analysis of what's wrong, and so to peace of mind. And that's why Nietzsche wished misfortune on his friends, because he believed that hardship was a necessary evil out of which, if these friends were skilled, they might be able to harvest beautiful things.
Would you ever wish failure on your friends?
No. The
For some
feeling
reason?
of failure, yeah.
Feeling of failure?
The feeling of failure.
Why?
Because the feeling of failure is horrible, and the feeling of making it again afterwards, just it puts it into context on how bad it feels to fail. You know, so the feeling afterwards is so much better.
Have you ever been to Naples?
No.
No. Okay, well, Nietzsche went to Naples, and Nietzsche says, in order to get great happiness from life, in order to harvest great happiness, you've got to live dangerously, he says. And he advises you to build your homes on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, which is a slightly reckless thing to do. Reckless, but it's a beautiful view. You see the sea, you get a wonderful view. And that's kind of his, you know, his idea that life's a risky business, and no pain, no gain.
True, yeah. You've got to take a chance at some point, I think. You know, because if you don't take a chance, then how will you ever know? I mean, the views could be absolutely fantastic, but if you say to yourself, if it erupts, you know, but the problem's a landslide, well, you'll never know if the views are that good. And the views could, you know, make up for that risk, that danger.
If Nietzsche gave some thought to what some good responses to problems might be, he also castigated what were, in his view, the disastrous ones. One of the worst was to head for the pub.
One of the most striking facts about Nietzsche is that he hated drinking alcohol. And this was more than just a personal taste. He believed that anyone with even the slightest interest in being happy should never go anywhere near a drop of alcohol. As he put it, all the more spiritual natures should abstain from alcohol completely. Water always suffices. Water, the Nietzschean drink.
To imagine there is benefit in escaping our troubles once in a while with an alcoholic drink or two is to misunderstand completely the Nietzschean analysis of the relationship between happiness and pain. Happiness does not come from escaping troubles. It comes from cultivating them, from turning them to your advantage. The last thing Nietzsche thought we should do with our sorrows is drown them. Our worries are vital clues, telling us what's wrong with our lives and pointing the way to our ultimate improvement. Nietzsche was born in the tiny village of Röcken in what used to be East Germany. His father was the parson. His deeply devout mother was herself the daughter of a parson. The philosopher adored his father and must have been deeply shocked when he died suddenly when Nietzsche was only 4 years old. The loss was to haunt him throughout his life. One of his first actions when he finally earned a little money after winning a court case against a publisher was to buy a large headstone which now covers his father's grave. And on it Nietzsche had inscribed a quotation from the New Testament. Die Liebe höret nimmer auf. Love never ceases. A traditional Christian message.
Even though Nietzsche loved his father deeply, even though he's buried in a Christian graveyard right next to his father, the pastor, Nietzsche had the greatest reservations about the kind of assistance that Christianity brings us when we're facing difficulties and problems.
It's striking to visit the house where Nietzsche was born, right under the shadow of the Lutheran church where his father preached, completely unchanged since he lived here. Little Nietzsche must have grown up breathing an intensely religious atmosphere. So it's very surprising to read the philosopher and find out what he had to say as an adult about his parents' religion. One does well to put gloves on when reading the New Testament. In the entire New Testament, there is only one solitary figure one is obliged to respect: Pilate, the Roman governor. And, quite simply, it's indecent to be a Christian today.
Nietzsche was rather against Christianity for the same reasons as he was against getting very drunk. In the short term, going to hear a service in a Christian church may make you feel quite good, in the same way as getting very drunk may make you feel quite good. But in the long term, Christianity, in Nietzsche's eyes, dulls pain. And in this way, it also dulls the energy that pain can give us to overcome problems and so reach real happiness.
There are undeniably certain differences between a pub and a church, but Nietzsche insisted that there were great similarities between the consolation available in both places. It seemed to him that the New Testament tried to make us feel better by saying that many things we thought of as problems are not in fact problems at all, but rather assets. To anyone worried about being too timid, the New Testament advises, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." To anyone worried about not having any friends, the New Testament says, "Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and insult you." And to anyone who worries about not having enough money and who envies those who do, the New Testament has these soothing words: "It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." Nietzsche took such words to be catastrophic. Like alcohol, Christian counsel might dull pain, but it will also weaken the resolve to overcome the problem from which the pain has arisen. So how would Nietzsche have preferred Christians to behave when faced with difficulties? Chiefly by not pretending that they didn't want the things that were difficult to get. Nietzsche had a host of difficulties. He was poor and sick and lonely, but he never behaved in the way that he had accused Christians of behaving. That is, he never declared that health and wealth and love were bad. He accepted that he didn't have them, partly by choice, partly by circumstance. But he did not deny his wishes. He did not deny his pain. And so it perhaps comes as no surprise to find in the parish records of his burial here in Röcken that the church authorities have written, beside his name, the words, "A known Antichrist." Although his life was hard, we shouldn't think that Nietzsche was miserable all of the time. On the contrary, he often talked about fulfillment, particularly when he was here in the mountains. But when he does talk about fulfillment, he's thinking of something richer than the sort of cozy well-being we might imagine. He writes sarcastically about people who are addicted to the religion of comfortableness. He calls them small, mean people, hiding in forests like shy deer. But those of us who dare to climb up above the tree line will see the views and breathe the air. It's then that we'll understand the benefits of abandoning comfort for true fulfillment. As Nietzsche famously said, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger."
Like every philosopher in this series, Nietzsche was interested in making people happy. However, unlike every other philosopher in this series, he believed that extremes of pain were a vital component in reaching the kind of happiness he had in mind. Not everything which makes us suffer is necessarily bad for us. Not everything which makes us feel good is necessarily actually good for us. To regard extremes of suffering as an evil, as something to be abolished, wrote Friedrich Nietzsche, is the supreme idiocy.